The fluorescent lights hummed like tired bees as James pushed his cart down the executive hallway for what should have been just another graveyard shift. But tonight, the mop water sloshed in rhythm with the numbers running through his head. 42% stock drop, 12 million missing, 0.8% ownership stake. His fingers itched for the security badge, burning a hole in his pocket. 6 months earlier, Donahue had smirked across that cherrywood desk. "You people never last," he'd said, tossing James' severance package like scraps to a dog. The framed diversity award on the wall had gleamed like a cheap joke. James could still smell the man's cologne, something expensive and cloying that lingered in the air long after he'd left a room. Now James paused outside that same office, watching through the glass as Donahue frantically packed his belongings into a cardboard box. The same kind James had carried out in 6 months ago. A half-empty bottle of 20-year-old scotch sat on the desk, its amber contents catching the light. Their eyes met through the glass. The blood drained from Donahue's face when he saw what dangled from James' lanyard, a CEO badge catching the fluorescent light. His hands trembled as he knocked over the scotch, the liquid spreading across paperwork like bloodstains. Down in the lobby, the night shift security guard Hector gave James the nod. "Boss," he said, the word sweet as revenge. The same Hector who'd once been written up for excessive bathroom breaks after his daughter's asthma attack. James noticed the new gold nameplate on Hector's uniform, head of security, and the way his back straightened just a little more than before. The elevator doors opened to reveal Sarah Chun from the SEC, her sharp heels clicking against marble. "You were right about the offshore accounts," she said, handing him a file thicker than his old paycheck stubs. "Turns out cleaning crews notice when executives shred documents at 3 a.m. She smirked, tapping the file. "And apparently they also notice when said executives use company servers to access their, shall we say, unconventional video collections." James rode the elevator up to the penthouse suite, his suite now, where Maya waited, swinging her legs in his new chair, her sneakers leaving scuff marks on the pristine leather. "Does this mean I get to go to Stanford?" she asked, eyes wide with the kind of hope that made his chest ache. He thought of the Cayman money already being rerouted to employee back pay and scholarships. Thought of Donahue's panic when he realized the janitor's card had been recording everything, not just documents, but every racist joke, every backroom deal, every moment of casual cruelty. Thought of how quiet a boardroom gets when the person they've ignored for years finally speaks. "Better," James said, spinning his daughter in the chair until she giggled. "We're building our own damn school." He pulled up blueprints on his computer. A gleaming new campus with dorms named after civil rights leaders, labs stocked with equipment better than Stanford's, and a scholarship fund that would make sure no bright kid got turned away because of their zip code. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights glittered like possibilities. Somewhere down there, Donahue was probably still screaming into his phone at some terrified junior associate. James let the sound fade into the hum of the ventilation system, the same steady hum that had kept him company all those late nights when he'd stayed after his shift to study corporate filings instead of going home to sleep. The cleaning crew would be starting their round soon. James made a mental note to triple their benefits and convert an entire floor into proper break rooms with actual comfortable chairs. After all, they were the only ones who really knew where all the bodies were buried. And as he looked at Maya's excited face, already sketching ideas for a future science lab in the margins of his notes, he realized something else too. The best revenge wasn't just winning. It was making sure no one else would have to fight the same battles again. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows, casting long shadows across the stack of resignation letters from Donahue's inner circle that James hadn't bothered to read. He scrolled past another headline, "Technova whistleblower scandal rocks Wall Street," and paused at a paparazzi shot of Donahue trying to hide his face behind a newspaper outside his Hamptons estate. The billionaire's eyes looked hollow, his tailored suit hanging loose like he'd lost weight overnight. A soft knock interrupted his reading. Layla stood in the doorway, holding 2 steaming mugs of the good Ethiopian coffee they used to save for birthdays, her wedding band glinting in the sunlight. She hadn't slept in their bed since the takeover. Though he'd woken twice this week, to find her reading glasses left on his nightstand. "You should see your inbox," she said, placing a mug beside the tablet where a particularly damning video of Donahue was paused mid-rant. Her fingernails, usually perfectly manicured, showed tiny chips in the polish. "Half the Fortune 500 wants to discuss opportunities, and Harvard's begging you to give their commencement speech." James sipped his coffee, letting the rich flavor settle on his tongue. "Not just me." He pulled up a dashboard showing hundreds of encrypted submissions, secret recordings, buried documents, even text messages lighting up the screen like fireworks. Turns out Donahue kept better records of his racism than his offshore accounts. Down in the Technova lobby, a crowd had gathered beneath the new equal pay for equal word banners. Not protesters, but cafeteria workers holding thank you signs and the night shift engineers passing around homemade tamales. The receptionist who'd once called security when James tried to use the executive bathroom now clutched a tissue as she told reporters how the new CEO had personally reinstated her mother's chemotherapy coverage. Across town, Donahue sat in his lawyer's office staring at a settlement agreement that smelled faintly of bourbon and desperation. His attorney cleared his throat. "The video evidence is extensive. They're offering to keep the more personal material private if you agree to these terms." The pen shook in Donahue's hand as he signed away his remaining shares, the ink bleeding slightly where a drop of sweat fell on the paper. Back at Technova headquarters, James stood before the newly expanded R&D lab where the young black programmer Donahue had fired for not fitting the culture was demonstrating her AI that could detect pay disparities. The machine beeped cheerfully as it analyzed their own HR records. "Turns out the algorithm agrees with the janitors," she grinned. "We've been getting robbed for years." That night, as James cleared out his old locker in the janitor's closet, he found a folded note tucked behind his spare uniform. "The night crew has your back, always did." It read, signed by every cleaner, security guard and maintenance worker in handwriting ranging from careful cursive to shaky block letters. Beneath the signatures, someone had added a postscript. "P.S. The good chocolate cake is in break room C freezer. We saved you slices for 3 years." He was still laughing when Maya found him, her arms full of blueprints for the new school. "Dad, look, I designed a robotics lab that..." Her voice trailed off as she saw the note. Without a word, she pulled a marker from her pocket and added her own signature beneath the others, her tongue poking out in concentration, just like when she was little. Outside, the first stars appeared between the skyscrapers, the same stars James used to count from his father's postal truck, just framed by fancier windows now. Somewhere in the building, an overnight cleaner hummed along to a jazz station as she mopped, her new healthcare card secure in her wallet. The rhythm of her work echoed through the vents, steady as a heartbeat, familiar as coming home. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry hornets as James descended into the subbasement, the air growing thicker with each step. His old janitor keys jingled against the flashlight Maya had thrust into his hands, pink with unicorn stickers, bought with her first allowance. The irony wasn't lost on him. The door to serve a room B was slightly ajar. Not unusual, except for the fresh scratch marks around the lock. James' pulse pounded in his ears as he pushed it open to reveal Sarah kneeling before an open server rack, her face illuminated by the glow of a blinking external drive. "They left us a present," she said without turning around. The drive's contents spilled across her laptop, blueprints for something called Phoenix, dated yesterday. James' breath caught. The schematics showed Technova's entire AI infrastructure, with subtle, vicious alterations. Algorithms designed to systematically undervalue minority neighborhoods for insurance premiums. Voice recognition that would accidentally filter out regional accents during job interviews. The very tools he'd fought to dismantle, weaponized and ready for mass production. A metallic clang echoed from the ventilation shaft. Hector's voice came through James' earpiece. "Movement in the east stairwell. 3 no, for suits heading your way. Not ours." Maya's fingers flew across her tablet. "Dad, the drive's broadcasting. The lights died." Emergency strips bathed the room in blood red as a deafening alarm shrieked to life. Sarah cursed. yanking wires from the server. They never wanted the company. They wanted us to find this, a Trojan horse to wipe every shred of evidence. James' old mop closet instincts kicked in. He slammed his palm against the wall where he knew the manual override hid. Behind the employees must wash hands sign Donahue had mocked for years. The alarm cut off mid-screech. Silence. Then slow, mocking applause from the doorway. The emergency lights bathed the flooded server room in a sickly yellow glow as James waded through ankle-deep water, the shattered remnants of Maya's unicorn flashlight still clutched in his hand. The acrid smell of burnt circuitry mixed with the metallic tang of blood from the gash on his forehead. Somewhere in the darkness, a loose wire spat sparks like a dying firework. Sarah emerged from the wreckage of server racks, her usually pristine blouse now streaked with grease and water. She held up a scorched hard drive, its casing cracked open to reveal the delicate circuitry inside. "Got about 60% of Phoenix," she said, her voice tight. "Enough to see what they really built." A cold laugh echoed through the room. Donahue stood in the doorway, his Armani suit jacket missing, his tie loose around his neck like a noose. He pressed Hector's own gun against the security chief's temple. "You really think this ends with some broken servers?" His breath came in ragged gasps. "Crane's already airborne. Phoenix is in the cloud now. It was never about the hardware." Maya's voice crackled through James' earpiece, frantic. "Dad, it's spreading through municipal systems in 3 states already. Emergency services, traffic lights, hospital grids." James' fingers closed around the janitorial, keyring still clipped to his belt. The smallest key, the one marked only with a faded 5, bit into his palm. He remembered the first day on the job, old Manny from the night shift showing him the sublevels. "Ain't nobody goes down to 5 no more," he'd said with a wink. "But you'll want to know the way." Sarah caught his eye, her gaze dropping to the keys. A silent understanding passed between them. "You're right, Richard," James said, tossing the keys to Hector in one smooth motion. The security chief caught them with his free hand, the movement practiced. "I am just a janitor." The gun wavered just long enough. Hector twisted, slamming Donahue's wrist against the doorframe. The gun clattered to the wet floor as Sarah delivered a perfect right hook to Donahue's jaw. The former executive crumpled like a puppet with cut strings. "Sublevel 5, James said, already moving toward the emergency stairs. Original mainframe room from the 70s. Only place in the building not connected to the network." As they raced down the crumbling concrete stairs, the walls vibrating with the strain of dying systems, Maya's voice followed them. "You've got 28 minutes before Phoenix completes deployment. And Dad, Crane wasn't lying. It's not just targeting data. It's got control of physical infrastructure." The door to sublevel 5 resisted at first, its rusted mechanisms groaning in protest. When it finally gave way, the smell of mildew and old oil washed over them. Rows of antiquated mainframes stretched into the darkness, their dials and switches frozen in time. Sarah's flashlight beam landed on a massive red switchbox behind a cobweb danger, manual override sign. As James reached for it, the note from the night crew fell from his pocket, fluttering to the grime-covered floor. The ultraviolet ink they'd all signed with now glowed faintly in the dim light, revealing a second message beneath their names. "Pulled the fuses 3/15. Safety's off. Give him hell." James' hand closed around the override lever. Somewhere above them, alarms began to wail. The countdown in his earpiece ticked below 20 minutes. "Last chance to change your mind," Sarah said, her hand covering his on the switch. This could take down the whole eastern grid. James thought of Donahue's sneer, of Crane's private jet, of all the invisible hands that had built this company only to be erased from its history. His fingers tightened. "Some systems," he said, "need to burn." The lever resisted at first, its rusted mechanisms grinding like old bones, protesting movement after decades of stillness. Then, with a shower of sparks and the shriek of protesting metal, it gave way. The lights died first, not just in the sublevel, but in the visible strip of stairwell through the open door, a wave of darkness rolling upward through the building. James' earpiece emitted one last burst of static, before going dead. Then the vibration started, deep in the building's bones. A shuddering groan built into a roar as emergency generators far above them coughed and died. Somewhere, a pipe burst with the sound of a gunshot, followed by the hiss of escaping steam. Sarah's flashlight beam cut through the sudden dark, illuminating the horrified understanding dawning on Hector's face. "You just killed the power to half the city," he breathed. James watched dust sift down from the ceiling. "No," he corrected quietly. "I just leveled the playing field." A new sound emerged, the distant, panic bleating of fire alarms. Not Technova's modern digital system, but the original analog backups installed in the 70s, wired directly into sublevel 5. The sound was raw and mechanical, a screaming birth cry of the building's forgotten infrastructure reasserting itself. Maya burst through the doorway, her tablet's glow painting her face in eerie blues. "It worked," she gasped. "Phoenixes." The screen flickered, then stabilized. "It's still spreading, but slower. The old analog systems are fighting it." Sarah grabbed the tablet, her fingers flying across the display. The override didn't just kill power. It forced a cascade reboot through every municipal system connected to Technova's original mainframe protocols. She looked up, eyes blazing. "James, you didn't just pull an emergency stop. You rolled back the entire Eastern Seaboard's infrastructure to pre-internet protocols." A groan came from the stairwell. Donahue staggered into view, one hand clutching his bleeding nose, the other the railing. You maniac," he slurred. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" James stepped forward, the years of night shifts and overlooked contributions, of condescending smiles and stolen ideas, burning in his chest like the emergency lights still flickering their last in the hallway behind Donahue. "I did exactly what you trained me to do," he said quietly. "I took out the trash." Somewhere far above them, a helicopter's rotors beat the air, news crews, or maybe Crane making his escape. It didn't matter. The countdown on Maya's tablet had stalled at 7 minutes and 32 seconds. Phoenix's progress, halted by systems too old and too simple to be vulnerable to its digital predation. As the first shouts of emergency responders echoed down the stairwell, James picked up the glowing note from the floor. The night crew's signatures pulsed gently in the dark, a constellation of the overlooked and underestimated who had, in the end, held the real power all along. He handed it to Maya. "Add your name," he said. "History's going to want to remember who actually saved the world tonight." Outside, dawn was breaking over a city waking to unexpected quiet. No smart traffic lights, no digital billboards, just the raw, unfiltered hum of a world forced to pause. Somewhere in that stillness, James knew, the real work was just beginning. The first rays of dawn filtered through the broken windows of Technova's lobby as James stepped over tangled wires and scattered paperwork. The air smelled of ozone and damp concrete, the aftermath of their desperate gamble. Outside, the city stretched silent and dark, no honking cabs, no flashing neon signs, just the occasional flicker of emergency vehicle lights cutting through the gloom. Maya clutched her tablet to her chest like a life preserver. "It's not just the East Coast," she whispered. "Phoenix is dormant, but it's still out there, sleeping in every system it touched." A sharp beep broke the silence. Then another. Across the lobby, forgotten landline phones began lighting up, the old analog system springing back to life one circuit at a time. James lifted a receiver to his ear just as Hector grabbed another. "Mayor's office," Hector mouthed, his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. Sarah wiped grime from a monitor, revealing grainy footage of Crane's jet sitting motionless on a tarmac, its systems dark. "Air traffic controls down worldwide," she reported. "They're grounded." A commotion at the doors. The night cleaning crew pushed through, led by elderly Manny, who still wore his janitorial blues. He took one look at the devastation and grinned, revealing a gold-capped tooth. "Heard you kids needed backup." From his pocket, he produced a yellowed schematic, the original 1978 wiring diagrams for Technova sublevels. James' breath caught at the handwritten notes in the margins. Emergency broadcast protocols, analog failsafes, all the forgotten backdoors of a pre-digital age. Manny winked. "We've been keeping receipts." As the team gathered around the plans, a new sound emerged. First a murmur, then a roar. James moved to the shattered windows. Below, a crowd was gathering in the streets. Not panicked, but purposeful. Utility workers in hard hats, nurses in scrubs, teachers carrying flashlights. The people who actually kept the city running, now stepping forward to do it themselves. Maya squeezed his hand. They're not waiting to be saved. James looked down at his daughter, then at the makeshift war room forming around Manny's schematics. The real infrastructure of the world had never been servers and algorithms. It was the hands that built, the voices that connected, the stubborn refusal to stay powerless. Somewhere in the building, an old fax machine whirred to life. A single sheet of paper emerged, a list of names, locations, skills. The beginnings of a resistance written in the language of the analog age. James rolled up his sleeves. The silence had been the easy part. Now came the real work. The fax machine continued to spit out its paper like a tired prophet, delivering revelations. James caught the curling pages, his fingers tracing the handwritten names and addresses. Retired engineers in Queens, a hacker collective operating out of a Brooklyn library basement. Even a group of amateur radio enthusiasts in Staten Island. Manny chuckled as he read over James' shoulder. Told you we had people everywhere. His gnarled finger tapped one name, Dr. Eleanor Park, retired head of Technova's analog division. Ellie been waiting 30 years for this fight. The lobby doors burst open again. A woman in a soot-streaked MTA uniform dragged in a crate of old CB radios, their antennas poking out like bristles. Heard you could use these, she panted. Behind her, a dozen more city workers carried boxes labeled with fading Sharpie. Switchboard parts, vintage modems, telephone repair kits. Sarah grabbed a radio, her fingers dancing across the dials. We can use these to coordinate. Static crackled, then a voice emerged. This is station W2XQ repeating. All analog systems functional. Over. Maya's eyes widened. She scrambled for her tablet, now connected to an ancient switchboard someone had wheeled in. If we can piggyback on these old networks. Her fingers flew across both digital and analog interfaces, bridging eras. The tablet screen flickered, then displayed a map of the city with pulsing dots. Every working analog node lighting up like fireflies in the digital dark. A new sound cut through the murmur, rhythmic, metallic. Hector turned toward the stairwell as the noise grew louder. What now? The elevator doors shuddered open manually, revealing Donahue, flanked by 2 National Guard soldiers. His smirk faltered when he saw the makeshift command center. Mr. Carter, one soldier said, ignoring Donahue completely. Mayor's orders. You're to be deputized for city infrastructure repair. He handed James a badge. Says here you're now officially Director of Emergency Technology. Donahue's face purpled. You can't, he's just a... The MTA worker stepped forward, pliers in hand. Finish that sentence, rich boy. I dare you. James pinned the badge to his still damp janitorial shirt. Outside, the crowd had begun singing. An old Union song Manny immediately joined. The lyrics spoke of solidarity, of outlasting the powerful. Sarah handed James a radio. Channel 7. It's Eleanor. The voice that crackled through was sharp as a whip. James Carter? Heard you kicked the hornet's nest. Good. A pause. Now let's teach these tech bros what real system architecture looks like. As dawn's light strengthened, the lobby hummed with purpose. Young hackers elbow to elbow with retired phone technicians, all rewiring the world on their own terms. Maya grinned up at her father, a soldering iron in one hand and the glowing night crew note in the other. Somewhere in the distance, a traffic light flickered to life. Not its usual robotic green, but a joyful, blinking yellow. A temporary fix. A beginning. James keyed the radio. All right, people. Let's get to work. The city had been dark for 3 days. Not dead, never dead, but quiet. A held breath. The kind of quiet that made people look up from their screens. That made neighbors share flashlights and stories on fire escapes. That forced the world to remember how to talk without keyboards. James stood on the roof of Technova, watching the first manual grid come online. Block by block, borough by borough. Powered by retired engineers, school teachers, and a legion of forgotten workers who still knew how to turn wrenches and rewire circuits. The lights flickered to life like stars waking up, one by one. Below, in the lobby-turned-command center, Maya and Sarah hunched over a Frankenstein network of spliced cables and jury-rigged servers. The last remnants of Phoenix had been cornered, trapped in the digital equivalent of a lead-line box. A vintage mainframe even Crane's AI couldn't escape from. "Got it," Maya whispered, her fingers freezing over the keyboard. A single keystroke. The screen flashed red, then died. Silence. Then, a sound like 1,000 dial-up modems, singing in harmony as the city's original infrastructure exhaled. Traffic lights blinked yellow. Landlines hummed. And somewhere over the Atlantic, Crane's private jet lost its stolen access, its systems rolling back to factory settings mid-flight. The hearing room was packed. Donahue sat at the defendant's table, his tailored suit now ill-fitting, his arrogance replaced with the twitchy exhaustion of a man who'd been indicted on 17 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and, thanks to Hector's testimony, attempted murder. James entered quietly, taking a seat in the back. He wore a suit now, but his hand still bore the scrapes and calluses of manual labor. The judge peered over her glasses. "Mr. Carter, you've declined every interview request. Why speak now?" James stood, not for the cameras, not for history, but for the faces he knew were watching. Manny in his recliner, Hector's daughter in her college dorm. The night crew gathered around a break room TV. "Your Honor," he said, "this wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering." He held up a simple switch, the kind that could kill power to an entire building. "We built a world that runs on invisible work we ignore until it stops, and then we act surprised when the people who do it finally say enough." He set the switch on the railing. The moral isn't that the little guy won. It's that we were never little to begin with. Final scene. Technova lobby, present day. The new plaque beside the elevator gleams. Maya Carter Innovation Center. EST 2024. The future belongs to those who build it, with their hands and their hearts. Outside, the city hums, not perfectly, not permanently, but alive. And in the sub-basement, just behind the old "Employees must wash hands" sign, a single analog switch waits. Just in case. Moral: true power isn't control. It's the knowledge that no system, no matter how advanced, can function without the people it underestimates.